Welcome into New York Giants Now by Chat Sports. I'm your host, Marshall Green. In today's video, we're going to take a deep dive into a Bleacher Report article that came out that listed some trade ideas that, quote, firework trade ideas that would transform the NFL. And inside that article, the Bleacher Report writer said the New York Giants acquiring T. Higgins, wide receiver from the Cincinnati Bengals. We've talked about T. Higgins a couple of times now on the channel, especially in the early parts of the offseason. The Bengals, they're a team that is ready to win right now, which makes me feel like this trade would not happen right now, but they do have decisions to make when it comes to their salary cap because it is going to be hard to pay Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and all of the talented players they have on their roster. This is what Bleacher Report said in their article about why the Giants could be a team that are interested. They went on to write, the Cincinnati Bengals would probably love to keep the core of Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins together for the foreseeable future, but unfortunately, it's going to be difficult with salary cap restraints. Several teams should be willing to pay a first and third round for a receiver, but the New York Giants make a lot of sense. They would give the Bengals a chance to trade Higgins out of the conference and should be in the market for a true number one wide receiver. After handing Daniel Jones a massive contract extension this offseason, they have to invest in making him successful. Their cap situation was a little tight this offseason, but they have $44 million in cap space on the books already in 2024. Like I said a minute ago, I do not think that a T. Higgins trade is going to happen prior to the 2023 NFL season getting kicked off for the New York Giants. But I do think that if the Giants still think maybe at the trade deadline they need a wide receiver, that's also not all that likely in my opinion. But I do think in the 2024 offseason, following this season, if the Giants were not sold or not impressed with the current crop of wide receivers they have on this roster, they are absolutely going to make moves and get Daniel Jones that number one wide receiver. You don't pay a quarterback $40 million per year and not invest in your investments. And that's what Joe Schoen has done so far, and he will continue to do that. They could invest in their investment of Daniel Jones by adding a playmaker to this offense that could be a go-to guy, a number one wide receiver, and a guy that Daniel Jones looks to build with as he is still a young player in this league. This is the trade idea that Bleacher Report threw out there for wide receiver T. Higgins. It was a first-round pick, it was a third-round pick, and another third-round pick. So the first and third in the upcoming 2024 NFL draft, and then a third-round pick in 2025. We're going to compare this trade to other trades for NFL superstar wide receivers in a quick second, but I want you guys to get involved in the comment section early on in today's video. Would you make this trade? If you were Joe Schoen or you were able to talk to Joe Schoen, would you tell him to make the move? Type A for accept, type D for decline. I want to hear from you guys down below. It's a lot, no doubt about it, but let me hear what you think right now. And remember, subscribe to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to continue to put out Giants content every single day, all summer long, leading up into the 2023 season, where we will be live for every preseason game, every regular season games, and we'll also be doing live shows every single week. So subscribe, because if the Giants make a move, we're going to make a video, and we're going to be the first one on it. My thoughts on that T. Higgins deal is I would decline it. I just think a first and two-thirds is too high of a price point right now for the Giants to trade for T. Higgins. It's honestly probably too high for the Giants to trade for almost every wide receiver in the National Football League. It's nothing against T. Higgins. He's a great player. I mean, when you look at what he's done for Cincinnati over the past 3 seasons, he's been electric. In his career, he has over 3,000 yards, 19 touchdowns, 14.1 yards per catch, and he gets better and better and better every single year. And he's also performed really well in the playoffs. He has 4 games of over 80 yards in the playoffs. He has 3 touchdowns in the playoffs. And if you go back to the regular season, he's got 10 games in 3 years over 100 yards. And he's got 14 games of more than 93 yards. And he has 2 games of multiple touchdowns in the regular season. He's a true outside wide receiver, can push the ball down the field. He can get over the top of the defense. He can rise up and put it on your head top and moss somebody in the end zone like we've seen him do time and time again. He's an elite player. It's just that price point is a little bit too rich for my blood at this current moment. I would do a first and 1/3 round pick, but I can't do a first and 2 third-round picks. And the main reason that I can't do that trade that we talked about earlier is just it's too much. And when you compare it to other trades that have gone down recently in the NFL, we'll show this one more time, a first and 2/3 is not even close to the type of compensation that other teams have gotten for similar wide receivers. Let's go back and revisit that Tennessee Titans trade when they gave up A.J. Brown and he went to Philly. Remember, the Giants and Bleacher Report's article was 1 first and 2/3. Well, A.J. Brown went for 1 first and a third-round pick. That's less than T. Higgins, and I think everybody would agree A.J. Brown is better than Mr. Higgins. What about Devontae Adams? They gave up a first-round pick and a second-round pick, which do 2 third-round picks equal a second-round pick? Could you trade 2/3 for a second? I think 2/3 are almost more valuable than a second-round pick. And the only trade it could be somewhat compared to is the Tyreek Hill trade that had him go from Kansas City to Miami. They gave up a first, a second, a fourth, and a sixth. So is he better than Devontae Adams? He's younger, no doubt about it. Is he better than A.J. Brown? I would say no, and that's why I would not be willing to give up a first and 2 third-round picks. But I do know, and I can acknowledge, that the Giants do still need a top dog at the wide receiver position. They still need a number 1 receiver, a head honcho, a guy that's going to command double teams and make life for Daniel Jones easier. They definitely added talent to this group. They added more bodies. There's going to be a lot of competition to make this roster. Hopefully we don't have to have practice squad guys and waiver wire pickups in the middle of the year. I'm a fan of Hodgins, Shepard, Robinson, Slayton, and Campbell. I also like the rookie Jalen Hyatt. I think Jamison Crowder is a savvy veteran. Colin Johnson has looked good in his NFL career with the Giants outside of being hurt. And Bryce Ford-Wheaton is a very interesting player that has a lot of intrigue, and a lot of people think he's going to be really good in this league. So I'm a fan of the Giants depth chart. They definitely need a number 1 wide receiver, but I don't think it's going to happen before this season. And at this point, I would just roll with the guys that we got. What do you think about this one, though? Let's pull out the video game. Let's go on to Madden, and I want you guys to grade the Giants wide receiver depth chart on a scale of 0 to 100. It's like Madden. 0, you're the worst wide receiver core in the NFL. 100, you are the best. Grade the Giants wide receivers on a scale of 0 to 100. We're going to go through some Giants receivers and guys that I think could have bigger years than expected in a second. But first, make sure you guys are hooked up with our awesome deal of the day. Get a Giants hat and a Giants t-shirt for less than $25 at chatsports.com/Giants hat combo. That link's going to be clickable in the comments and description of today's show. Let's start with Darius Slayton. Slayton was a guy that almost didn't make this roster the past season. He actually had to take a pay cut to remain on the team, and he had a pretty dang good year. I would say his second best season in the NFL outside of his rookie year, where he had 8 touchdowns. In totality, he had 46 grabs for 724 yards, 15.7 yards per catch, 2 touchdowns, but the drops still somewhat remain a problem for Slayton. 20 drops over the past 3 years is just simply too much. He's a really talented player. He's a big play threat. You see that by the yards per catch. I'm expecting Slayton to have a big year coming up for Big Blue due to that chemistry he has with Daniel Jones. Isaiah Hodgins was really good for the Giants this year in those 8 games he played since he got picked up following the waiver wire, picked up off the waiver wire, 33 receptions, 351 yards. He had 4 touchdowns. He somewhat became that go-to target for Jones. He was that big slot that could get open, that could create separation, and he just found a way to get a role and make the most out of it in the stable offense. And he was even good in the playoffs. He absolutely tore up the Minnesota Vikings and Patrick Peterson. In the 2 playoff games combined, he had 9 catches for 108 yards, a touchdown, and he averaged 12 yards per catch. I think Hodgins could be a guy that could sneak up on some people and surprise them once again as he's back with Big Blue. I'm keeping my eyes on Wan'Dale Robinson. I thought he really started to come on before he had that ACL injury. I mean, in his last game before being hurt, he had 100 yards. He just looked quick. He looked spry. He looked like he and Daniel Jones were really starting to build a strong connection. He can operate out of the slot. He can get some handoffs in motion, some of those shovel and push passes. I believe the second-year player out of Kentucky, if he can bounce back from that ACL, he's going to be a good player for New York this year. Sterling Shepard is probably the most talented Giants wide receiver. The thing is, he hasn't played in more than 12 football games over the past 4 seasons. He's played in 10 games in the last 2 years. He's coming back from that ACL injury, but he looks good at OTAs and he looks good at minicamp. He looks fresh. He looks quick. Maybe he starts the season on the PUP list, but I'm hoping for himself and for this team that he can stay healthy. Shep is always going to be one of my favorite Giants, the longest tenured Giant, and he's going to be a guy that I hope is once a Giant, always a Giant, and only a Giant. Paris Campbell was probably the biggest wide receiver the Giants brought in free agency, if you're not including Darren Waller. And I thought Campbell really started to show in Indy this past year, where he played all 17 games, the type of player that he could be. He can operate out of the slot. You could put him on the outside, and he could push. He could be a guy that you push the ball down the field to. He's one of the fastest players in the NFL, excuse me. He was also clocked at the fastest speed of any player in the NFL last year. He is going to be someone that is going to be very important in this Kafka and Dable offense. I believe he's going to be a big play threat and a guy that can get some handoffs very similar to Wan'Dale Robinson. Jamison Crowder, I think, is going to be in a roster battle competition with Sterling Shepard. I believe one of these guys will make the roster. They want to keep one of those smart, savvy veterans on the team that can operate out of the slot. He's made some plays this summer. Would not be shocked if he is a standout in the preseason and ends up being one of the final wide receivers New York keeps. What about the rookie? Big play, Jalen Hyatt. We know what he does, and that's all he does is score touchdowns. 19 yards per catch last year for the Volunteers, 67 grabs on the season, 15 touchdowns. Absolutely tore up the Alabama Crimson Tide defense. Giants got him in the third round. I am interested to see what his role will be on this team early on in the season, just because of numbers and depth that the Giants have at the wide receiver position. Could be hard for him to get on the field, but the Giants drafted him for a reason. He will be a guy that has some big plays for New York this season. We've talked about every single Giants wide receiver today. Which one of them will have the most receiving yards this season? I want to hear from you guys down below in the comment section. I would either go with Darius Slayton or Paris Campbell. That would be my vote. Or if you want to say Darren Waller, you can go there as well. As always, I appreciate you guys for tuning in to New York Giants Now by Chat Sports. Make sure to hit me up on Twitter. Give me a follow at @MarshallGreen_, and we'll see you later.